Today our story is about a man who spent the last years of his life seeking revenge, and a curse that might have backfired. But hey, if you're into weird, mysterious, and downright eerie stories, then you found your spot. We roll out a new story every week, so if you're up for a thrill, why not stick around? Hit the like button like it's a snooze button on Monday morning, and don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell so you won't miss out on our weekly dose of intrigue. Alright, let's jump into today's story. Fred is 62 years old and lives in Indiana. He and his wife Grace have been together a long time but didn't have any kids. Now that they were getting older, Fred's starting to think about their final resting grounds. He'd recently heard that the citrus industry was booming in Florida and thought that would be a great place to invest his money. So he and Grace packed up and moved to Florida. When Fred found out about a new cemetery being built in Orlando called Greenwood Cemetery, he thought it sounded like the perfect place for him and Grace to be buried. The town of Orlando was growing fast because of the citrus industry, so Fred thought it would be nice to be part of that growth, even in death. The cemetery was owned by 3 lawyers who told him about a special piece of land that was really nice, great for burial plots. Fred couldn't see the exact spot because they were still clearing the land and there was just a lot of smoke and debris everywhere. But Fred trusted these lawyers and decided to pay for the plots without seeing them first. A month later, Fred came back to check on the cemetery and found out that the lawyers were nowhere to be found, and the beautiful plots he bought were actually just swamp. It was useless land that couldn't be used for anything, especially not a burial plot. Fred was really upset about this and tried to find the lawyers, but they disappeared. Not being able to talk to them in person, he wrote them a letter asking for his money back. But they just wrote back saying that all sales are final and no refunds. This made Fred really angry. He felt personally cheated by these fancy lawyer types. He'd worked hard for his money and he wasn't gonna let them get away with this. Fred became so obsessed with getting revenge on the lawyers that he started to push his wife Grace away. Then Fred came up with a plan for revenge. He bought 3 more plots in the same swampland and put up headstones with curses on the lawyers. He wanted to curse them so that when they died, their souls would be pulled back to the swamp and trapped there forever with him. Fred believed that this curse would make the lawyers suffer for scamming him. As time went by, Fred went back to living his life and even made up the money he'd lost. But then the lawyers came back to town. They were all messed up, having nightmares about the swamp, seeing the cursed headstones in their dreams. They felt like they were tied to the swamp somehow. They'd even contacted each other and found out that they were all having the same problems. Their lives were falling apart. One's wife left him, another's house burned down. These lawyers were so obsessed with the swamp that when they came back and saw that the headstones were real, they knew something wasn't right. As they were standing there looking at the headstones, they thought about Fred and knew they had to find him. When they found Fred, he told them, "I cursed you, and I'm glad about it." So the lawyers told Fred, "Look, you've made your point. Let us buy the plots back and get our lives back. We will pay you double what you paid." Fred reluctantly agreed, but all of this had already gone to his head and made him a bit crazy. When Fred had first told Grace about his cursed plan, she didn't believe it would do anything because curses aren't real. However, when the lawyers came back and confirmed that the curse had affected them, Grace got scared and started thinking, maybe the curse is real. She couldn't handle what was happening with Fred anymore and decided to leave him and go back to her family up north. Fred was left alone, but he was convinced that the curse is real and he had the power to curse them again. After a few more years of plotting, he bought another plot of land and built a mausoleum to tether the lawyers' souls, not just to the cemetery this time, but to his gravesite, where no one could buy it back. Today, if you visit Greenwood Cemetery, you might see Fred walking around his mausoleum, but no one has ever seen the 3 lawyers. Did Fred really manage to retether all of their souls, or was his last act of revenge just a curse on himself?